the data. So here's the Excel file. You could import this into SPSS, but with our limited amount of time, my suggestion is that we use that for doing some kind of crosstabs when we try to move this from a 4-minute presentation to a 15-minute one on April 28th. So I've given you the very basics. There are 2 headers in here, so it's the question number plus it's a description of the question. Sometimes that way you don't have to keep flipping back to the question guide. Some of the questions I've just got text in here, yes or no's. Other things, it's all rating scales. On some of these though, like this question, which of the following ways would you most likely support? And it allowed people to check all boxes that apply. That's why people hate doing check all boxes that apply or ranking, because there's no easy way to be able to record the data and then put it into Excel or SPSS for some kind of thing. So it was giving strings like on this one, 0, 0, 0, comma, 0, comma, 1, comma, 1, comma, 1, comma, 0, which doesn't mean anything. You can't actually use that unless you use SPSS or something to cut up everywhere there's a comma to translate that into a different cell. So on like this question here, 4.4, that was all about that particular topic. I actually had to split it up into 4.4.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, so that there could be a separate column for each of those things. And then if they marked yes, then translated any of the yes check boxes as ones throughout this whole thing. And had to do that there. Which issues are the most important? What do you mainly use social media for? Which social media platform do you use? What sources do you trust? And so on. And then we get back to just a bunch of other number-based ones or text-based ones like male, female, their actual age entered as a number, the region they're from, and so on. So here's all this information, but again, until it's time to do some lengthy crosstabs, which can sometimes take weeks to do, and we didn't have based on the timeline of this challenge, I went ahead and made some pivot tables down here. So if I was to zoom in on the demos, this is going to go ahead and I know it's small and it's hard to see, but if you open it up and you look at it really quickly, there were 371 participants. This is the number and the percentage of males versus females, and just a tiny amount that said that they didn't want to say. I don't think that you really have to make a big deal about that. To be honest, most of the data on almost every question that I asked it to do some kind of a crosstab or a filter, the gender had almost nothing to do with anything, but on an overhead and in a written section, people like to get the lay of the land. So you don't just say we did a survey and here's some findings. You would say we did a survey. It was based on using Prolific as a pool. We had 371 people, about this percent male and female, even if you never use it again. And the average median age of our people, 18 to 24, was 20.94. So basically 21 years old. Then I went ahead and included, not that again, there's probably much room for this, especially in a 4-minute thing or a block of text that only allows you to write 250 to 300 words for right now. Their political views, which were for the most part pretty moderate, or maybe, I mean, there weren't anybody who were extreme liberals and very few extreme conservatives. And keep in mind, this is not an 8-point scale. It's a 1 to 7 scale, with the other option being to opt out and say, I don't want to answer. But there's not a lot of extreme views. Almost everybody's clumped in the middle, kind of like a bell curve, which is how normal data ends up looking. Most of the people who are moderates or maybe leaning slightly conservative compared to slightly liberal. Political affiliation, again, independent was by far the biggest category. Maybe a few leaning Republicans rather than Democrats. So the data was saying it was a little bit in the middle or a little bit to the right. Cool. The regions that it's from, again, you don't need to take the time on an overhead in the presentation to list all these things. This is just maybe one sentence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 7th major region would be non-contiguous states like Alaska, Hawaii, which for whatever crazy reason we got nobody from. So we got responses from people in 48 states. 371, which means, honestly, we got less than 10 on average from each state, which is not a huge sample. But it's still a good size sample because it's almost 400. It's way better than just getting 50 or 60, which is like data you shouldn't even bother reporting. So you could easily just say, for the most part, we've broken out over all 6 major regions in the United States. I don't think that you really have time to say this, but again, most of the people were from suburban areas or large cities, followed by small cities. We had very few rural people. Again, that's just a complete duplicate of the political views, so nothing there. Moving over to the media tab real quick. I wouldn't make too much of a deal about this. Why? Because 400 people or close to it is enough to get attitude ratings and be able to project them to a larger audience. Anybody would tell you that. But in terms of personal usage, like social media, man, when we're talking about like that Pew study that I had you look at earlier in the semester, that was from probably 60 to 90,000 people. Even when Hootsuite or Buffer or Social Sprout does something about social media, sometimes they're tracking millions of data points by following accounts, and sometimes they're also doing surveys of 10,000, 20,000. So this is where things fall apart the fastest. I'll even tell you, your social media behavior is probably very different from even people down at IU Bloomington, or even across town between you and Notre Dame. Nevertheless, if you wanted to mention any one of these things, the average number of hours spent on social media, the biggest one was 3 to 4 hours. Next biggest one was 5 to 6 hours. But we had a few people who said less than an hour, and we had some people said more than 6 hours. Wow. What do you mainly use social media for? Keeping up with friends, entertainment, sharing content, and then everything else about learning or about getting news. All of those things, they're still there. They just fall off dramatically to being like less than half of what the big ones are. Which platforms? Again, people could check up to 3. That's why it had the weird columns with the .1, .2, .3 after the question. YouTube, the biggest universal one by everybody. Then Instagram and TikTok. Look at those. Those 3 are huge. And then we end up getting things like Reddit and Spotify and Facebook and X and Snapchat and other that just start to fall off. So those are your 3 big ones. Who do you trust? Major news sources, a little over half. Friends, then nonprofit advocacy, and then a kind of a drop off before you get to government. And then, yeah, because how much research does a social media influencer do? Well, yeah, instinctively, people just don't trust those viewpoints. They may look at them, but they don't necessarily trust them, which is why they're smaller, or basically that's barely beating the group of people who said, I don't trust any sources. Top 3 platforms, just did a summary. Those things, top 3 trusted sources, there they are too. The biggest tab, the most important one, is the perceptions one. This is what the entire challenge was all about. If you go back through and look at some of the questions that I had you build and kind of coached you into doing some more like it, everywhere within the challenge, they were basically screaming, this is what we want to know. This is what to report. So if you're going to use a lot of numbers, whether the written thing or even to be able to talk out loud, you can't possibly show all these, but this page would be the dominant one. So familiarity with the UN, kind of in the middle. Ever heard of the UN USA? Which is kind of tough because I didn't even know the name of what that account was. 3 people out of 371, or less than 1%. That's great because from an evaluation metric or an objective, we need to get that up higher than less than 1. So that's fantastic that it put us in that position. Opinions about the UN tended to be kind of neutral or somewhat favorable. Global issues, neutral or agree or strongly agree that global issues really do affect me. Trust in the UN, well, quite a bit and somewhat were the biggest ones. Of course, we've got people at both ends, but we don't have a whole lot of people out there. So what is this really saying? It says that in a lot of ways, impact of international organizations, they have little impact. And then you combine that with not sure, that's 55%. So people are saying global issues affect me, but how much do big organizations like the UN or anything like that, probably like the Red Cross, probably like any big entity, I'm not sure, or it has a little impact. Makes perfect sense from an intuitive point of view. Support, how likely would you support it? Yeah, somewhat likely. Maybe. Opinion again, this is where I relisted that exact same question from up here. So E is the exact same thing as W. Put something down here. because this is kind of what I figured would happen and why I suggested you put it twice, because this is exactly what a judge would want to hear or your boss would want to hear. We don't have the ability to track after the fact. We're just going to make projections. But this is a before and an after within our survey, and that is gold. So UN opinion before was 3.41 on a 1 to 5 scale. So more than midway in terms of being, yeah, probably. UN opinion after, 3.66. That may not seem like much of a change, but it's 0.25 on a scale of 1 to 5. It is significant. So even just reading, being asked about it, and then reading some questions or being asked to think about global, here's some things that the UN or other issues that affect you globally. And then you come back and you rank how important how important is the UN? The number went up just simply by hearing about it, which again screams back that this is a huge awareness challenge. Average global concern, well, that was higher than what it is for the UN, which is absolutely understandable. To think that the global issues affect me being more than the actual entity of the UN, the CDC, the Red Cross, NATO, anything that does something like that. Again, that went up too, and that's significant also. So here, which opinions changed between the before and the after? Well, 38% of them didn't do anything. They stayed exactly the same. If they marked a 3 or whether they marked a 4 or a 2, whatever, they didn't change. But almost 42% went up. Did some go down? Sure. So the more they thought about global issues of the UN, the worse they thought about it. But good news is only 20% of the people decreased, whereas more than double that at 42% went up. That's a cool thing. That's something that should be talked about. That is exactly what that challenge screams that they're looking for in this whole thing. Again, not about social media hours. And if you think about it too, think about it. Sections 1, 2, and 4 are all about research, numbers, and your plan. They're all worth 25%. What about the media one? Section 3, which is both your creative and your media plan. Combined, that's 25%. So maybe that's 12% creative, 12% media plan. So all these other factors are the real reason why they had you do the challenge, to think about the big picture, to think about what really the problem is, not just, hey, we only have 100,000 people following it. Oh, I guess we should just give up. Nope. Continuing on. So plurality of response became favorable. A big group didn't change. Some people did change. So bottom line, the net effect of that is exposure to global issues nudges opinions positive. Yep. Just hearing about it moves your weighting factors on those things up. But no, it's not completely universal, and it didn't happen for everybody. Here's the column where I took all those individual factors, which again, they put it in the challenge because they want to know, did you ask about this? Did you even think about it? Or were you just trying to use influencers to say, the UN's cool, sign up and get a free hat, which isn't going to get any kind of lasting change for any kind of a nonprofit. So here were the rating scales for everything from climate change, human rights, humanitarian aid, global, all these different things. Most of these are kind of somewhat or quite a bit. None of them were not at all. Well, obviously a couple people here, 24 not at all, but that's overweighted by 108 saying somewhat and 122 saying quite a bit in terms of human rights and equality. So I went ahead and did a little summary over here because you can get lost in this. I don't think you have the space to put this in a chart to give them unless you just attach this Excel file with these things. Nor does it make sense to put this as 1 slide, 2 slides, 3 slides. Nope. Instead, you could say we assessed 6 major factors of things that the UN is involved in, or that global entities can be involved in. And what we came back with was, according to our sample, climate change and sustainability, humanitarian aid and disaster relief, and human rights and equality were the 3 biggest ones. So I wrote a little teeny summary. If something was worth mentioning, maybe on a slide or in one part of the thing, it's these 3 things. Maybe it's some kind of overall summation kind of a score or something like that. But maybe it's just mentioning those 3 things and then get the heck out of that and move on. In addition to actually giving you the data, I went ahead and added this. Key takeaways from the data. So this is something that more than likely would need to be mentioned, although in a briefer form, in both the video and in the written section, especially 1A. We did a survey in Qualtrics. we distribute it through prolific.com, which is supposed to be better than a lot of those other things. You can mention that. You could ignore that. Total people, 371. The open-ended research, or our second research instrument, was also a document that we use through Prolific, which is supposed to be a better pool. The key takeaways: people care about global issues, but awareness is uneven and often unshallow. Read that. That right there, all these things right here are kind of really addressing specific paragraphs on the challenge. They should, in some way, shape, or form, whether it's some of these words or whether it's just rewriting these or simplifying them or putting them in your own voice, should be both in the written sections and should definitely be within the video. So that top one, awareness is crucial. Without awareness, which they don't have much of, because again, less than 1% know about the UN USA, that's a starting point. We need to get more people aware. Then we need to do things, thinking more about issues slightly improves the perceptions. Yep, we already saw that. That's what the before and after was. Awareness shapes perception, but the UN still feels abstract and distant. Yep. When issues feel removed from everyday life, they're seen as less personally relevant, making it harder to build a strong support or motivation action. If you really sit down and think about it, March of Dimes, Special Olympics, all these people are masters on figuring this part out right here and what that means to them. Because just continuously telling them, the UN is cool, the UN is cool, the UN is cool, the UN is cool. At some point, awareness can only go so far. You need to be figuring out what is the driver of human behavior. Support in theory is higher than in practice. Yep. We got to go from awareness to intention behavior, because most of the how much would you volunteer or what would you do about it was pretty low. The most realistic actions, if we were going to volunteer, was getting people to just share content and sign petitions. Way more than volunteering. Because how do you do that for the UN? Would that mean that you'd have to fly to New York to be able to do that? Or you got to fly to some other part of the world? Signing a petition is also a pretty easy thing to do. It's low barrier, as I wrote here. It's not like donating money or volunteering time, which how the heck do you do that in South Bend or in Plymouth, Indiana? The audience is mixed. Yep, the ideology shapes their views slightly, but it doesn't really determine them. Again, politically, our people were in the middle or maybe leaning toward the right. Right now, currently, the administration, the people who are extremely at the right, don't like the UN, don't like global issues. It is America number one, America number one. We don't need to worry about anybody else in the world except America number one. And what did our participants say? Not true. They may still be in the middle or lean to the right, but if their values or ranking the UN or global issues were above the midpoint, which they all were, that means deep down, I still care. I still care when I see pictures of people who are starving around the world. I still care when I hear all these other kind of horror stories about diseases running rampant, economic collapse, because ultimately, if we're ever going to export to that country, we need to make sure that we're not giving the money, but that we're doing something to help encourage them to get their economy in handle, or else we'll never be able to export. Media habits are diverse. Trust is fragmented. Yep. Bottom line, definitely read that. And then implications for strategy. That's the end of this. So I kept this sheet, the summary page that I wrote, to be less than 2 pages. I think everybody should be taking a look at that. One more thing that I think this affects enough people, both the video and the written part. Here's some short version of the objectives. Just again, kind of feeding off of the information from 1A there. The section that's in 1, I think it's 1C, be very short, very broad. There'll be more numbers based in the 4th section, and I do have to help. I don't remember whether it was Martin and Devin or Martin and Jacob on how to be able to craft, a half a page of writing for that particular one, which I have open and I need to finish later this afternoon. But in the video, you need to make a very brief mention, like the Kleenex video said it, even the Bose one said it, even if it's just one slide. Right after the research section, right after picking the people, right before you go into the big idea, is based on these things, our objectives are one slide. You don't even necessarily need to read them all. So the slide wouldn't have to be on the screen for more than 15, 20 seconds at the absolute most. So I just wrote this in there just to make you think. Awareness isn't universal. Understanding is shallow. UN's reach is tiny compared to the audience size. Think about how many millions of 18 to 24-year-olds there are, and there's only 100,000 following them on the UN USA. So without awareness, nothing else matters. So here's objectives, just loosely based. These can be rewritten. You can ask me my advice on this. Increase awareness, increase perceived relevance, make it personal. Again, make it personal. Don't just say the UN is cool or the UN does good things on the far corners of the earth. How does that affect Americans? Otherwise, you're losing the game right there. Improve the favorability toward the UN, increase understanding of what the UN does, and drive low and barrier engagement, which could honestly just be get more people to follow you on social media, get more people to make a comment, get more people to share it with a friend. That is low level engagement. That is low level volunteering. That is low level action. Awareness, relevance, understanding, favorability, action. And here I just wrote, if somebody was looking for on the video or something else to put in the written section, maybe this is the thing that you put as like a lead-in paragraph before you even get to those bullet points. So those are 3 things right there I think everybody should be taking a look at. And I'm going to send where they are in an email in just a few minutes.